Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away. The systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the image? A boy in the rain, burned bread in his hands, Katniss, half-starved, watching him through the bakery window while his mother screams. He accidentally burns the loaves, takes the beating, and then throws the bread to the girl in the mud. That moment becomes the origin story of their relationship, the first spark of hope in a district where hope is a dangerous luxury. Cut to years later. Same boy, same girl, but now they're in a meadow with children of their own. No arena, no cameras. Just a promise that the nightmares will come less often. At face value, it's the neat ending. The boy with the bread gets the girl he saved, and love finally wins over the games. But here's the real question. What if the girl he saved never fully forgave him? Because the fandom story is simple. Peeta is the pure-hearted cinnamon roll, the one person who loves Katniss without asking for anything back. Katniss is traumatized, guarded, focused on survival, and prim and the rebellion. But eventually she realizes she loves him too. They heal together, they choose each other, and the games lose. That's the version that fits on a poster. But when you go back into Katniss's head, there is a lot to uncover here. Her narration is full of resentment, suspicion, and quiet scorekeeping around Peeta. From the moment his name is called at the reaping, she's tallying debts. He gave her bread. She owes him. He might be working with the careers. He might be a threat. His public love confession, a strategy she wasn't warned about. Even the star-crossed lovers' act in the cave is a performance she calibrates, constantly asking how much of this is real and how much is another game. That part matters because the Capitol keeps weaponizing him against her. The romance narrative in the first games, the quarter quell where they're thrown back in as a matched set, and then the hijacking where the Capitol takes the one person who chose her and turns his love into hatred on purpose. When hijacked Peeta tries to kill her in District 13, it's not just horror, it lands as a personal betrayal her trauma brain can't fully separate from his actual choices. So the question isn't, does Katniss love Peeta? She does. She tells us in her own careful, reluctant way. The real question is, does Katniss ever stop holding Peeta responsible? Responsible for the games that keep dragging them back. For the star-crossed lover script that traps her. For being the face on every screen when Prim dies. For the unbearable guilt of surviving when so many others don't. This is where we talk about their marriage as something more fragile than a fairy tale. By the end, their relationship looks less like a sweeping romance and more like a ceasefire built on shared nightmares. Forgiveness here isn't clean. It's complicated, partial, and maybe impossible. And that's exactly what we're going to cover next. Why forgiveness in Panem is a deadly question. So once you see their marriage as a ceasefire, you have to ask a much sharper question. In a world built on betrayal, what does forgiveness actually cost you? In fandom, it's easy to jump to that Victor's Village fantasy. You picture Katniss and Peeta in their kitchen, bread in the oven, kids in the meadow, trauma neatly filed away behind those perfect white doors. At face value, it looks peaceful. It looks earned. But here's the real question. In Panem, when has victory ever meant the games are truly over? Winning just moves you to a new arena with better furniture. Back in District 12, before the reaping, survival meant hunting, trading, counting every grain of tesserae. After the arena, survival means something else. Choosing who you trust when everyone, including your fellow victor, has already been used as a weapon. That part matters because Katniss's core wound is trust. Her father dies, her mother shuts down. The capital starves her district on purpose. So why would she suddenly relax just because the house is bigger? This is where we talk about why Katniss keeps questioning Peeta's motives. Why does she dissect every gesture in the cave, wondering if it's real or just part of Haymitch's plan? Why does she react so violently when he throws himself into danger for her? From the mutts in the first games to the beach in the Quarter Quell. There is a lot to uncover here. To Katniss, sacrifice isn't romantic. It's a threat. If Peeta dies for her, she has to live with that debt, that guilt, forever. And then the hijacking hits. The capital takes the one person who has promised her unconditional support and rewires his memories so that his love becomes terror and hatred. Rationally, she knows he's a victim, but emotionally, every time hijacked Peeta tries to kill her, it confirms her deepest belief. Letting someone close is dangerous. Forgiveness, in that context, isn't just about feelings. It's a survival risk. In Katniss's world, trusting the wrong person gets you or your sister killed. Remember, the bread in the rain tied Peeta to Prim's survival before she ever met him in the arena. He's her lifeline and the capital's sharpest knife, wrapped in the same boy. He's the symbol of hope on the train and the capital's most effective weapon in District 13. Love versus duty. Safety versus rebellion. That's not an abstract theme. It's the daily calculation of whether she can afford to let go of anger. So when we ask whether Katniss forgives Peeta, we're really asking, what ending are we seeing? Is Victor's Village a place of healing or just a quieter arena with no cameras? Two victors, no audience, still trapped in a system that taught them forgiveness could get them killed. And the real twist is what happens when Peeta starts forgiving her faster than she can forgive him. Our thesis: love, debt, and the score Katniss keeps. So if their ending isn't pure healing, what are we actually looking at between Katniss and Peeta? This is where we talk about our core claim. Katniss never truly forgives Peeta, not because he's unforgivable, but because the entire relationship from her point of view is built on a debt she can't pay off and a series of betrayals she never fully chose. Katniss lives by an internal accounting system. You see it from the beginning. Who snared which rabbit? Who owes tesserae? Who risked the fence? Survival in District 12 is math. If you miscalculate, someone dies. So she keeps a ledger in her head. Food, favors, promises, lives. And Peeta enters that ledger as the boy with the bread, her family's literal salvation during starvation. an unpayable credit that immediately puts her in emotional debt. At face value, that should create gratitude, a soft spot. But here's the real question. What happens when the person you owe also becomes the person the games weaponize against you? We're going to cover how every major Peeta moment reinforces that ledger instead of clearing it. In the first games, his public confession of love isn't a private mutual decision. It's a strategy Haymitch cooks up and Peeta executes without warning her. Suddenly, the capital has a narrative. Star-crossed lovers, sponsors, kisses in a cave. Every time Katniss plays along, she's calculating, how much food does this performance buy? How much does this promise cost me later? That part matters because the romance isn't just romance to her. It's a survival tactic she has to perform on command, with Peeta as both partner and trap. He's the boy who wants through her bread, and now he's the boy whose feelings she might be exploiting on national television. More debt, more guilt. Then the quarter quell raises the stakes. Peeta keeps sacrificing himself, giving her the locket, insisting she live instead, walking into danger in the arena. On the surface, it's devotion. Underneath, every sacrifice says, I'm worth more dead than you are. You owe it to everyone to survive. Her sense of debt spikes again. How do you forgive someone for making your life worth more than theirs when your core wound is already about failing to protect people? And then the hijacking. The Capitol takes the boy who loved her and rewrites him into someone who wants her dead. Technically, that's not his fault, but emotionally, the person she owes most now tries to kill her with his bare hands in District 13. Intimacy becomes lethal. Trust equals strangling on the floor while everyone watches. There is a lot to uncover here in how that shapes her capacity to forgive, because Peeta's hatred is manufactured, but the terror is real. The Capitol fused love and harm so tightly that Katniss can't fully separate Peeta from the system that used him as a weapon. So even when the war ends, when they return to a haunted victor's village and start building a life, it feels less like a clean slate and more like a negotiated ceasefire. Two victors sharing a house, a bed, a future, but also a scorecard of bread, caves, beaches, and choke marks. In the next section, we'll trace that score from the very first crust of bread to the last pages of Mockingjay, and ask, where exactly does Katniss stop tallying, or does she ever? Roadmap through the arena of their relationship. So to map this out, we're not just wandering through Katniss and Peeta's relationship, we're running a full arena simulation of it. Every act has a trap, a mutt, and a rule change that explains why forgiveness never quite makes it out alive. First, we're going back to before the bread, before the games, before Peeta is even a question. This is where we talk about Katniss's core wound, her father blown apart in a mine explosion, a mother disappearing into grief, and a 12-year-old forced to keep a district-level promise to her own family just to keep them from starving. We're going to cover how that combination, death, abandonment, and hunger, builds a girl who will always choose duty over desire, survival over softness. When you grow up knowing that one missed rabbit means Prim doesn't eat, what does romance even mean? Then we move into the middle, the machine phase. The games take that wounded kid and weaponize Peeta against her at every turn. At face value, the reaping is random. But here's the real question. Why is it Peeta, the boy with the bread, standing there when she volunteers for Prim? On the train, in the interviews, suddenly her private debt is public spectacle. The Capitol turns Peeta's confession into a storyline, the star-crossed lover's narrative that Haymitch pushes and Katniss never actually consents to. That part matters because in the arena, the kisses in the cave, the shared blanket, the promise of a future, it's all filmed, scored, and sold back to the districts as hope. And it doesn't stop with one victory. The Quarter Quell drags them back, flips the rulebook, and says, "Your previous games? Practice round." Now Peeta is both her ally and her liability, a victor turned target used to control her every move. By the time we reach the hijacking, the system has done something even darker. So we're carving out a whole section just for that. The Tracker Jacker hijacking is where the Capitol literally rewrites Peeta's memories so Katniss becomes the threat. Bread becomes poison, kisses become traps, and the girl he once loved is now the mutt in his mind. We'll break down why his recovery, those real or not real scenes, feels strangely hollow for Katniss on a forgiveness level. If he tried to kill you with his bare hands because someone rewired his brain, who do you actually blame? After that, we'll step into Victor's village post-war. The house, the kids, the meadow, the nightmares. On paper, it's peace. But we'll ask why routine doesn't automatically equal absolution, and how sharing a bed with the person who once choked you isn't exactly a clean emotional reset. Finally, we'll end with speculation. We'll read the epilogue as a truce more than a fairy tale, and explore alternate timelines where Katniss truly forgives Peeta, or never chooses him at all. The real question is, in any arena, does she ever stop choosing duty first? Welcome to Victor's village, where we overthink the breadcrumbs. So if that sounds a little intense for a love story, that's because it is. Around here, we don't treat Katniss and Peeta as a poster couple for the power of hope. We treat them as two traumatized victors trying to build a life in the ruins of the games, where every kiss, every argument, and every night, terror is evidence. Welcome to Victor's village. This is where we talk about why the bread on the snow, the cave kiss, and the strangling in District 13 are not random dramatic beats, but a through line in Katniss's relationship with Peeta. At face value, the franchise sells you star-crossed lovers who finally get their quiet meadow. But here's the real question. What does Katniss's own narration say she actually feels when the cameras are gone? On this channel, we're going to cover the parts the movies gesture at and then sprint past, the political machinery behind their romance, the psychology of a girl who associates Peeta with both salvation and unbearable guilt, the way the Capitol weaponizes that connection, from the first game's confession to the hijacking that turns his promise of protection into a literal death grip on her throat. There is a lot to uncover here, and we slow down enough to track every flinch. So where does this video fit into all of that? This isn't a Peeta versus Gale referendum, and it's not a ship war. We're treating why Katniss never truly forgave Peeta as a forensic read, line by line through her thoughts, her silences, and the choices she makes after the war. Why does she keep him close but guarded? Why does the epilogue read more like a negotiated peace than a grand romantic payoff? Why does she still sound a little tired? If you love pausing on the cave scene to ask whether Katniss's performance ever fully turns into genuine desire, you're in the right district. If the beach proposal makes you wonder when strategy blurs into real hope, or if the District 13 strangling still raises the question of how you forgive a weapon the game's turned on you, you're exactly who this channel is for. For newcomers, don't worry about keeping book canon and film canon straight. We'll flag it. When the movies erase Peeta's prosthetic leg or soften the hijacking's impact, that part matters because it changes how dangerous he feels to Katniss and how much forgiveness costs her. We'll always tell you when the adaptation shifts the emotional math. If you want more deep dives on this level, from whether Gale ever truly understood Katniss to why Prim's death freezes her capacity to trust, consider sticking around the village so you don't miss the next breakdown. Now, let's go back to the bread in the rain and watch Katniss start a debt she never believed she can pay off. Before the bread, how starvation taught Katniss not to forgive. Because before the bread hits the mud, Katniss has already learned the most brutal lesson District 12 can teach you. Forgiveness doesn't fill a stomach. We're going to cover the mine explosion fast, because the emotional fallout is what really rewires her. Her father dies underground in an instant. One moment, he's the singing coal miner who makes the scene feel a little less suffocating. The next, he's gone, and the house is silent in a different way. Her mother doesn't just grieve, she disappears while still standing in the kitchen. So you've got an 11-year-old staring at empty cupboards, a cat she considers killing for meat, and a little sister who has no idea how close they are to dying. Back then, the games are already in the background, but starvation is her real arena. Every day becomes a question: who has bread? Who has roots? Who might turn you in if you poach on the wrong side of the fence? At face value, you could say Katniss just becomes tough. But here's the real question. What does it do to a kid when every human interaction is mapped against hunger? Gale isn't just a friend. He's a hunting partner whose absence means fewer squirrels. Greasy Say isn't just kind. She's a potential buyer for illegal meat. Even the Hob is a network of risk and reward. Trust becomes a calculation, not a feeling. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters when we talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness assumes you can afford to be generous. Katniss can't. The one person she should be safest with, her mother, fails the survival test. While Katniss drags home game, her mother sits in bed, unreachable. Years later, even after she understands depression, Katniss narrates that she still can't fully let go of that anger. The wound never closes, it just scars over. This is where we talk about her rule. Love always comes second to duty. Prim's name in the reaping ball is worth more than any feeling Katniss has about anything. You see it when she volunteers without hesitation. You see it when she tells herself she doesn't have the luxury of wondering whether she really loves Gale or Peeta. The priority list is simple. Prim, survival, then maybe emotions. So when Peeta throws her the bread, he's not stepping into a neutral emotional field. He's stepping into a brain that has been trained to track debts and dangers with the same intensity. He doesn't just save her life, he creates a permanent imbalance. One loaf on his side of the scale, a whole family's survival on hers. Her survival brain never stops weighing that. And if your entire childhood has taught you that owing someone can get you killed, What happens when the games turn that boy into your supposed salvation again? In the next section, we'll watch how that rainy act of mercy mutates into a story the Capitol can weaponize, and why Katniss's gratitude is always edged with something sharper. The boy with the bread as an unpayable debt. So we have this rainy act of mercy that the Capitol will later stretch into a fairy tale. But before it's propaganda, it's just bread in the mud. Here's the real question. What does that moment actually feel like from Katniss's side of the fence? Back then, she's not a victor, not a symbol, not the girl on fire. She's a starving kid who has quietly decided she might not make it. Her father is dead. Her mother has checked out. Prim is crying from hunger. Katniss has already hit the point where you stop planning and start going numb. And then she looks up and sees the bakery boy through the rain. At face value, Peeta burns some loaves. His mother beats him. He tosses the ruined bread to the pig. And then, almost casually, closer to the fence where Katniss is. But that part matters because from her perspective, this isn't a cute meet cute. It's a calculated self-sacrifice she did not ask for. He takes pain from his own parent so she and Prim can eat. You're supposed to say, wow, how romantic. Katniss's brain says, what did that cost him and what does it now cost me? There is a lot to uncover here. Gratitude hits first. The bread literally keeps her alive. But under it, there's shame that she needed saving at all, and anger that he had enough to spare while she was out in the rain, waiting to die. In a district where everyone is poor, discovering someone your age has bread to burn rewires your understanding of the playing field. This is where we talk about the emotional ledger. From that night on, Peeta isn't just the baker's son. He's the moment she chose not to die, when she later thinks, to this day I can never shake the connection between Peeta and the bread that saved my life. She's telling you that every future interaction is haunted by that original imbalance. Every time she sees him at school, she is also seeing herself huddled by the pig trough. So she stalks him with her eyes. She watches him at lunch, in the halls, at assemblies, trying to decode the reason. Was it pity? Rebellion against his mother? Some weird capital R romance? We're going to cover how the games weaponize that question. But notice what never happens. She never thanks him. The debt stays open. It festers. And once the games begin, that open tab becomes the foundation of their entire relationship. He owes her nothing. She owes him her life. How do you ever get to clean, uncomplicated forgiveness later when every argument, every betrayal, every hijacked attempt on her life is sitting on top of you once saved me in the rain and I can never pay that back? Katniss's trust issues. Why love is always a threat. That unpaid debt doesn't just sit in the background. It rewires how Katniss thinks about every feeling that comes after. Because for her, affection isn't neutral, it's dangerous. This is where we talk about Katniss's core rule. People are only safe as long as they don't get in the way of her real mission. Protect Prim, keep the family alive, outsmart the games. Relationships have to orbit that. You see it with Gale. They hunt together, share food, share secrets about the districts and the capital. But emotionally, she keeps him on the far side of the fire. When he pushes toward romance, she freezes, or changes the subject, or mentally files him under problem to manage instead of person to lean on. And here's the real question. Why does love specifically feel so threatening to her? At face value, You'd think in a world of starvation and whippings, love would be a relief. But Katniss explicitly frames it as a weakness. She's horrified by the idea of having children because the games turn parenthood into a death sentence. She looks at the Capitol's romance narratives, the star-crossed lovers, the swooning audiences, and feels disgust, not envy. That part matters because it tells you she doesn't just distrust the Capitol, she distrusts the entire story where intimacy is a reward. Remember how she reacts to owing people emotionally? Rue's family, Thresh, even Haymitch? Gratitude is almost painful for her because it implies a promise to care, to show up, to risk. There is a lot to uncover here, but the short version is, every bond is another potential hostage. So when Peeta stands on that stage and confesses his love, he isn't just embarrassing her, he's blowing up her survival strategy. She survives by being unreadable, by saying as little as possible, by never letting the Capitol or another tribute see what she can't afford to lose. Peeta does the opposite. He exposes too much. He turns their relationship into a spectacle the Capitol can edit, re-air, and weaponize. In the arena, that openness makes them both targets. Sponsors only care because of the romance. Other tributes track them as a unit. The star-crossed lovers angle follows her back to District 12, into Victor's village, into every games-related performance she's forced into. Peeta's love is supposed to be a gift. For Katniss, it's a spotlight she never asked for. And here's the reason forgiveness gets so tangled. For Katniss, forgiving someone isn't just saying we're good. It means lowering a layer of armor, letting their needs, their pain, their expectations into her decision tree. With Peeta, that armor is what keeps her functional in the first games, in the Quarter Quell, in the rebellion. If she lets herself fully trust him, she risks freezing when he's in danger, hesitating when the mission demands something colder. We're going to cover how the Capitol understands this perfectly, because the next move is brutal. They take the one thing that might have slowly taught her to trust, Peeta's unwavering love, and twist it into proof that intimacy doesn't just hurt you, it hunts you. And when that twisted version of Peeta comes back to her, choking her on the concrete of District 13, the question isn't just what did they do to him, it's much worse. What did they just prove right about everything she was afraid to feel? Reaping Day, when Peeta becomes the Capitol's first move, if hijacked Peeta proves Katniss right about intimacy in the end, Reaping Day is when the Capitol quietly loads the gun. You think of that square in District 12 as the start of her hero's journey. But here's the real question. From Katniss's point of view, is it actually the start of a partnership, or the moment the games attach her oldest guilt to a living, breathing target? We're going to cover that pivot second by second. At face value, the 74th Reaping is already a nightmare. You're standing with Katniss in the crowd, fingers laced with prims because that's the promise. Keep her safe, no matter what. Then Effie reaches into the glass bowl, pulls the slip, and the name that should never be read in that square cuts the air. Primrose Everdeen. The book barely gives you time to breathe. Katniss doesn't weigh options. She doesn't think about odds. She moves. I volunteer comes out before the horror can even land. That part matters because it locks in her hierarchy forever. Prim first, survival second, feelings last. She steps onto the stage already in pure survival calculus. How do I stay alive long enough that Prim never has to do this again? Then the pattern interrupt. The second name, Peeta Mellark. And suddenly the games reach backward in time. Suzanne Collins writes Katniss's reaction as almost disorienting. She doesn't think, "Oh, good, at least I know him." She thinks of the bread, the boy in the rain, the burned loaves, her mother's collapse, the way his act of mercy both saved her and humiliated her. In one line, she admits that owing him is dangerous because debt is a relationship, and relationships get you killed. So why is Peeta in the arena such a problem? On paper, another tribute from your district should be a small comfort. You share a language, a history, a reason to hate the capital. But in Katniss's head, Peeta isn't neutral. He's the physical reminder that she survived when maybe she shouldn't have. Now she's being told she might have to kill the person she already watched suffer for her, or worse, watch him die for her again in front of all 12 districts. Here's the real question. How do you fight to win when winning might mean murdering the boy who once threw you hope in the form of bread? This is where we talk about Haymitch and Effie, because they don't wait for Katniss to figure that out. Before she's processed Peeta as anything but a symbol, they're already turning the two of them into a story. District 12's tragic pair, the pretty doomed volunteers from the seam and the bakery. To the capital, it's a perfect narrative hook. To Katniss, it's another cage. From the moment his name is called, does she really see Peeta as a partner? Or as the capital's first move in weaponizing her guilt, making sure that every step she takes in the arena is haunted by the question, who do I have to betray to survive this time? The train, the confession, and the first sense of betrayal. So when they step onto that train, here's the real question. Is Peeta actually her ally, or already her first opponent? On paper, they're two terrified kids from the same district. In practice, the capital has just turned their relationship into a game board before they even see the arena. On the train, you see the split immediately. Peeta talks. He laughs. He charms Effie and the cameras, remembers his table manners, asks Haymitch questions. Katniss counts exits. She memorizes food, layouts, potential weapons. To her, his friendliness isn't comforting, it's suspicious. Why is he making it so easy for them to love him? Why give the audience anything more to hold on to when those same people will cheer as you die? At face value, Peeta's just being Peeta, the baker's son who knows how to talk to customers and smooth over tension. But Katniss has survived by assuming every gesture has a reason. So when he waves at the crowd during the training center arrival, when he plays to the windows, she files it under strategy. If he's already courting the capital, where does that leave her? This is where we talk about the rooftop, the one place that feels almost honest. No cameras, just wind and the force field. Peeta tells her, "I want to die as myself." He doesn't want the games to change who he is. For a second, Katniss softens. You can feel it. Someone else hates the capital's script. Someone else doesn't want to be a piece. That part matters because it sets up the whiplash. She goes to bed with this fragile sense of shared resistance, this tiny promise that maybe they're on the same side. Then the interviews happen. We're going to cover that moment in detail, because this is the first time Peeta really breaks something in her. On stage with Caesar Flickerman, with Haymitch's full approval, Peeta drops the line, He's been in love with Katniss Everdeen for years. The crowd explodes. The Capitol gets its star-crossed lovers. And Katniss? She wasn't asked. She wasn't warned. She's turned into a storyline without consent. From the Capitol's view, it's brilliant. From Haymitch's view, it's sponsorship gold. From Katniss's view, it's betrayal. She feels humiliated in front of the entire nation, her private history mined for a romance she never agreed to. She knows instantly this will change how the audience sees her, how other tributes see her, how the games themselves will play out. And she had zero say in that decision. Yes, it improves her odds. Yes, it probably keeps her alive. But here's the real question. Does survival erase the way it tramples her agency? Katniss hits Peeta after the interviews, not because she hates him, but because he's just proven he can decide their shared narrative without her. There is a lot to uncover here. Even when Peeta is trying to help, he does it by overriding her strategy, her boundaries, her right to define herself. That seed matters later. When the Capitol hijacks him, when he turns on her, it doesn't feel like a brand new wound. It feels like the escalation of a pattern that started on a train, under bright lights, with a confession she never chose. So when we ask why forgiveness never comes easily, we have to go back here, to the first time Peeta saved her by rewriting who she was. The cave, performed love, real feelings, and quiet resentment. So if that first interview was the moment Peeta rewrote her story, the cave is where he rewrites her body. Not in a physical sense, but in what it's allowed to mean. And here's the real question. What happens to your relationship with someone when your survival depends on performing that you're in love with them? By the time we get to the cave, Haymitch's instructions are crystal clear. Play up the star-crossed lovers. Kiss him. Sell it. Sponsors mean food. Medicine, a promise that you might actually walk out of the arena. At face value, that sounds strategic, almost clean. You flirt, you get soup. But that part matters, because for Katniss, her emotions were always private weapons, not public tools. Now the games turn her into a product. So she walks into that cave with a script in her head. We're going to cover the bandaging, the cuddling, the lovers banter, but notice how she narrates it. Every kiss is measured. Every touch is evaluated in terms of sponsor payoff. She literally thinks about how it will play to the cameras while she's lying on his chest. You're watching someone split herself in two. The girl who strokes his hair, and the hunter mentally calculating how much broth that stroke is worth. This is where we talk about Peeta's side, because the contrast is brutal. He's not workshopping lines. He's talking about the day at school when he first noticed her, the bread in the rain, the years of watching her from a distance in District 12. He offers to die so she can win without turning it into a negotiation. There is a lot to uncover here, but the simple version is, for him, this isn't a bit. This is the culmination of a feeling he's carried since they were children. And that sincerity is a problem. Why? Because Katniss can't tell where the performance ends and the real boy begins. She resents that Haymitch and the Capitol have effectively handed her Peeta's heart and said, use this. She hates that every time she leans in for a kiss, she's wondering who's being manipulated. Peeta, the audience, or herself. She even worries about the bill coming due later. What will she owe him when the cameras are gone? A future? A promise she never chose? Any victor will tell you the games don't end when the cannon fires, and this cave is why. It fuses survival, manipulation, and intimacy into one inseparable knot. From this point on, Peeta's love is never just comfort. It's also the memory of being watched, graded, rewarded for how convincingly she can return it. So, when we ask why forgiveness never comes easily, we have to remember she doesn't just remember his kindness, she remembers being forced to weaponize it. And if the cave already makes love feel unsafe, what happens when the capital takes that same boy and turns his love into a weapon pointed back at her? The berries, joint rebellion, diverging guilt. So when the capital turns Peeta's love into a weapon pointed back at her, we have to go to the moment it first became dangerous. The berries. You remember the setup? The rule change that suddenly lets two tributes from the same district win together. The brief impossible promise that the games might end in something other than total loss. Katniss and Peeta fight, bleed, survive, and then, right at the finish line, Claudius Templesmith's voice snaps that promise in half. Rule change revoked. One victor. The capital wants blood, and it wants it romantic. Here's the real question. What do you do when the entire arena has been engineered to make you choose between murdering the boy who saved your life or proving you're still at peace in their games? Peeta's answer is simple. He's ready to die for her. Again, he drops his knife, tells her to shoot him, and means it. From his perspective, the relationship has always been real. The crush from the bread in the rain, the interviews, the cave. If one of them has to die, he's already decided it should be him. That part matters because his guilt is about not being enough, not being chosen, not being worth her survival. Katniss's answer is very different. She reaches for the nightlock berries. On the surface, it looks like a grand, tragic love gesture. We can't live without each other, so we won't live at all. But at face value, she's thinking tactically. She's calculating what the capital can and cannot afford to lose. Two dead star-crossed lovers? That's a broken narrative. Two victors who refuse to play? That's a crack in the games themselves. This is where we talk about diverging guilt. Peeta believes he's participating in a mutual sacrifice. Katniss is staging a joint rebellion. Same handful of berries, completely different stories in their heads. And when Seneca panics and the rule is reinstated, they both walk out as victors who have just humiliated the capital on live television. The aftermath is brutal. Snow blames Katniss for sparking unrest in the districts. Coin's rebels quietly do the same, turning her into the Mockingjay whether she wants it or not. She didn't mean to lead a revolution. She meant to not shoot a boy who wouldn't raise a hand against her. Now every promise of safety for her family is tied to performing that defiance again and again. Meanwhile, Peeta hears the real strategy talk. Hey Mitch, the camera's the suggestion that the romance might have been exaggerated for sponsors. His great honest love story might have been a tactic. There is a lot to uncover here, because his guilt becomes heartbreak. What if he misread everything? What if he forced a narrative onto a girl who was just trying to stay alive? So you get asymmetrical guilt. Peeta feels wounded that their relationship might be half performance. Katniss feels trapped by the consequences of a choice that permanently ties her to him in the capital's eyes. Every rebellion symbol, every Mockingjay pin, has those berries underneath it. And here's the question that never really gets spoken aloud. When your partner's purest love gesture becomes the symbol of a revolution you never meant to lead, how do you not secretly resent the other half of that symbol for existing at all? We're going to cover how the quarter quell takes that resentment and turns it into something even darker. Catching fire when Peeta's sacrifices stop feeling romantic. The quarter quell isn't just a deadlier arena, it's where Peeta's devotion stops feeling heroic and starts feeling intrusive. We come out of the first games with the berries already hanging over Katniss's head. On the victory tour, Snow turns that into a direct threat. Convince the districts, convince the capital, convince me that you did it out of love, or everyone you care about burns. Here's the real question. How do you forgive the person tied to a performance that now has a body count attached to it if you fail? That part matters because it pushes Katniss into a deeper, more suffocating role with Peeta. Public hand-holding was one thing. Now it's choreographed kisses in every district, the staged proposal in the snow, the televised engagement that she never actually agreed to on her own terms. At face value, it's romantic. The ring, the dress, the promise of a future. But under Snow's eyes, every I love you becomes a test she can fail. And Peeta is the co-star she never auditioned to stand beside. Then the pregnancy lie hits. Peeta drops it in the interview without warning her. Strategically, it's brilliant. Emotionally, it traps her. Suddenly her body, her imagined child, her entire future are part of the game's narrative, and she didn't get a vote. We're going to cover how much consent matters to Katniss later, but you can already see the pattern. Peeta keeps offering more of himself, and somehow it keeps spending her too. This is where we talk about the quarter quell reaping. When Haymitch's name is pulled and Peeta immediately volunteers, it's framed as noble. The boy willing to die for love again. But he doesn't consult Katniss. He decides whose life is worth more in a single step forward. From that moment on, he keeps doing it in the arena, taking the watch, walking point, throwing himself into danger with the quiet assumption that her survival is the goal and his is negotiable. On the beach, it finally snaps. Peeta hands her the locket, full of photos of Prim, her mother Gale, and begs her to live for them. He's clearly trying to give her hope, to make his death easier to accept. Katniss's reaction? Fury. She kisses him not because she's swept away, but because she's enraged that he keeps trying to write himself out of the story without asking her. Why does he get to decide that the only way to love her is to die for her? There is a lot to uncover here, but one thing is clear. Every sacrifice goes into a twisted ledger. Peeta thinks he's proving his love. Katniss feels the pressure of a debt she can never repay, a kind of emotional blackmail where his suffering is the currency. And when the arena explodes and the rescue comes, that ledger is exactly what the Capitol targets next. The beach scene. Love confession versus emotional hostage situation. So when we hit the beach in Catching Fire, that twisted ledger you're thinking about, it doesn't disappear. It crystallizes. We've just watched Peeta slam into the force field. His heart literally stopped, Finnick hammering his chest and breathing air back into his lungs. It's chaotic, brutal, pure games logic. Your ally is dead until he's not. Then suddenly, quiet. The arena fades to waves and sand, and the story zooms into this tiny strip of beach where two victors sit with the whole capital watching. At face value, this is the romantic payoff. Peeta is alive, the sun is setting, and he pulls out that gold locket. Inside, Prim, Katniss's mother Gale, every person she feels responsible for, every reason she tells herself she has to survive the games, it's a perfect prop. It screams promise and hope and future. But here's the real question. What is Peeta actually doing with it? We're going to cover his speech, because that part matters, because it's not just sweet, it's strategic in a way Katniss never consented to. Peeta tells her his death would be a gift. Her life is worth more. She has people to go back to in District 12. He has no one but her. On paper, it sounds selfless. In practice, he's rewriting the rules of their relationship without asking. This is where we talk about why Katniss's reaction is so jagged. Internally, she's wrecked. She's moved by the photos, by the way he's thought of Prim and her mother, by the fact that he understands her duty better than anyone. But she's also furious. She does not want him deciding he's expendable. She spent her whole life fighting a system that treats people as disposable. And now the one person who claims to love her most is volunteering himself for the same role. So what's the trap here? If she refuses his sacrifice, it feels like she's rejecting his love, rejecting the one thing he believes he has to offer. If she accepts it, she's agreeing to let him die for her again, signing up for a lifetime of guilt every time she sees that locket in her memory. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is emotional coercion without any villain monologue. Peeta doesn't intend it that way, but the effect is the same. She is cornered. Any choice Katniss makes here is a loss. And that's the quiet horror of the beach scene. His love always arrives bundled with impossible pressure and future blame. If he dies, she failed him. If he lives because she fought him, she's betrayed his wish. How do you ever feel even with someone after that? How do you forgive a person whose devotion keeps putting you on trial? Hold on to that question, because the Capitol is about to weaponize this exact dynamic and turn the beach into a rehearsal for something much worse. The arena shatters, the roles reverse. The arena doesn't end with a cannon. This is where we talk about the moment the games literally break, but Katniss's relationship to Peeta breaks in a quieter, more devastating way. Beatty's plan sounds technical on paper. Run his wire to the force field, time the lightning, blow out the system. But in practice, it's chaos. Finnick is screaming her name, Johanna has already tackled her and cut out the tracker, and Katniss is standing there with a single impossible choice. Arrow, sky. She fires into the force field, and the arena fractures. The air itself screams. Tributes are thrown, the ground flips, and for a second you can't even tell who's alive. At face value, it's a victory. She's done the thing no victor is supposed to do. She's broken the games. But here's the real question. Who does the system decide to save in that instant? And who gets left behind as leverage? Katniss wakes up in the hovercraft, body burned, mind scrambled. Suzanne Collins writes that her first coherent thought isn't about Prim or Gale or even whether she's still in the arena. It's a single panicked demand. Where's Peeta? That part matters because it proves something she's been denying since the cave in the first games. For all the resentment, all the confusion about performance versus reality, Peeta has become the center of her emotional gravity. Her brain reboots around him. And then the pattern interrupts. He's not there. We're going to cover the reveal on the ship because it's one of the most loaded conversations in the trilogy. Plutarch, suddenly not just a bored game maker, but a rebel leader. Haymitch, who was supposed to be on her side. They admit there was a plan all along to break her out, to turn her into the Mockingjay. Beatty, Finnick, even Johanna were in on it. Peeta, not part of the extraction. The Capitol got him. Almost as an afterthought, Gale adds the final blow. District 12 has been destroyed. So in about 5 minutes, Katniss learns her home is gone, her partner is captured, and everyone she trusted has been running a secret operation around her. Why wouldn't that feel like another Games? Only this time, she's the arena. Her sense of betrayal here is huge. Everyone made plans without her. Her promise to keep Peeta alive has been broken again, but not by the Capitol alone, by her own allies. She's now the Mockingjay whether she wants it or not, a symbol drafted without consent. If trust was already her core wound, this is salt ground straight into it. And the Capitol is watching all of this. They saw how using Peeta's love on camera forced Katniss to move, to comply, to hope. So why wouldn't they flip the script? If the Games weaponized his devotion, the hijacking is going to weaponize his hatred. The next phase of their relationship won't be about kissing for sponsors. It will be about surviving a version of Peeta who genuinely wants her dead. Which raises the darker question: how do you forgive someone for trying to kill you when you know they were broken on purpose? Hijacking 101. How the Capitol turns love into a weapon. So what does it actually mean to weaponize someone's love? Not in the metaphorical sense, but in a clinical, step-by-step, Capitol-approved procedure. This is where we talk about hijacking. At face value, hijacking sounds almost cartoonish, like they just flipped a switch in Peeta's brain from Katniss to kill. But here's the real question. How do you take the boy who burned bread for her and turn him into the boy who tries to choke the life out of her? The answer is both simple and horrifying. Tracker-jacker venom and repetition. In the books, the Capitol floods Peeta with that hallucinogenic venom and then forces him to watch footage of Katniss over and over until his mind rewires. There is a lot to uncover here because they're not erasing his memories, they're editing them. You remember the bread in the rain? The cave in the first Games, the arena moments where Katniss finally lets herself lean on someone, those are the exact scenes Snow's people pull. Only now, every time Peeta sees Katniss in those memories, the venom makes his body react with terror and pain. The girl who once meant warmth and safety becomes the monster in the frame. That part matters because it's so specifically targeted. They don't care about his childhood in District 12 in general. They care about the night he saved her from starving. They care about the cave kisses sponsors adored. They care about the Quarter Quell arena where he kept choosing her. The Capitol takes the core of their relationship, the promise that he will always try to keep her alive, and flips the emotional label from hope to threat. So when Katniss hears the clinical explanation in District 13, she understands the reason on paper. She knows he's been tortured. She can repeat the briefing. Tracker-jacker venom, altered associations, not his fault. But knowing that doesn't cancel out what it feels like when he looks at her with pure hatred. For the girl who's always believed intimacy equals danger, having the one person who consistently chose her suddenly want her dead hits a nerve nothing else can touch. And hijacked Peeta, doesn't just distrust her, he repeatedly tries to kill her. The first reunion ends with his hands around her throat. On the mission to the capital, he has to be muzzled and monitored because at any moment he might turn on her again. Every outburst confirms her deepest fear, that letting someone close is just another version of stepping into an arena. Even after the war, when his memories stabilize and they rebuild some kind of life, there's a fracture forgiveness can't quite cross. Katniss can hold his hand, can have children with him, can admit she needs his steadiness, but she can't unknow the feeling of his grip crushing her windpipe, or the sight of his eyes emptied of love. The capital didn't just break Peeta, it carved a permanent scar into the space between them. So where do you go from there? If the person you chose has been turned into your worst nightmare, how do you ever fully relax again? The strangling when Katniss's last safe place breaks. So where do you go from there if the person you chose has been turned into your worst nightmare? How do you ever fully relax again? This is where we talk about the moment the story stops being theoretical and becomes physical. The strangling in District 13. Up to that point, Katniss is hanging on by threads. She's burned, concussed, grieving District 12, barely holding her family together underground. But she has one fragile promise in her head. If they can just get Peeta out, something will feel solid again. He's the boy with the bread, the cave the one victor, who always took the hit so she didn't have to. In her mind, rescuing Peeta is how she pays off a decade of debt and maybe earns a little hope. So they bring him back. You remember how it's staged, the big reunion corridor, the white walls, everyone watching. At face value, it's supposed to be a reward scene, almost a propaganda moment for the rebellion. Two star-crossed victors, finally reunited after the capital's torture. Katniss walks in fragile but expectant, rehearsing the script we've seen before. She runs to him, because of course she does. You can feel that old game's pattern kicking in. Find Peeta, get to Peeta, and you might survive this. And then the pattern snaps. He doesn't open his arms. He slams her into the wall. His hands go straight to her throat. No hesitation, no confusion, just pure targeted violence. She can't breathe. This is the same grip that once held out burned bread in the rain, now crushing her windpipe on a concrete floor. There is a lot to uncover here, because in a few seconds the narrative flips. Peeta, the boy who always saved her, becomes the one trying to kill her while the district's rebels pry him off. The physical damage heals. The psychological damage does not. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. For Katniss, this is proof they don't end even when you escape the arena. Her core story about Peeta is inverted. He was the safe choice, the gentle one, the antidote to Gale's fire. Here's the real question. What happens when your safe person is now the source of your most visceral terror? Afterward, she responds the way a trauma survivor from District 12 would. She avoids him. She has flashbacks. She hears his boots in the hallway and her body goes straight into fight or flight. She's furious at the capital for hijacking him, but she's also furious at him. And that part matters because her nervous system doesn't care about the reason. It only remembers the hands. Intellectually, she can say, "This isn't Peeta, this is the venom." She can sign off on the mission to bring him back, sit in on his recovery, rebuild a relationship in the ashes, but her body never fully forgives that moment. The trust fracture is permanent. and it quietly shapes every room they share after the war. So when they end up together in Victor's village ruins, are we watching a grand romance or a negotiated ceasefire between two people who both terrify and need each other? And if that night in District 13 never really leaves her throat, what does that mean for the way she loves him next? Reprogrammed Peeta versus broken Katniss. An uneven recovery, so when they end up in those ruined Victor's village houses, you're not watching two healed Victors settling down. You're watching a reprogrammed Peeta sharing a kitchen table with a Katniss who's gone emotionally offline. And here's the real question. How do you rebuild a relationship when only one person is actually trying to come back? This is where we talk about the real or not real game. At face value, it sounds almost childish, right? Peeta asks, "You kissed me in the arena, real or not real?" And Katniss answers, "But in the text, it's basically cognitive therapy." He's sorting through hijacked memories, taking what the Capitol twisted and pinning it down with an outside witness. Every answer is a tiny vote for reality over venom. And notice the direction of travel. For Peeta, the game slowly reconstructs his love. At first, Katniss is the mutation, the threat. Then she's a confusing ally. Eventually, through repetition, she becomes the girl who sang to Rue, the one who buried him in bread, the one he chose on the train. The game is his way of walking back toward that original promise he made to himself, not to be a piece in their games. But what is Katniss doing in those scenes? She's there, she participates, she answers the questions correctly, yet her narration is somewhere else. She's cataloging war strategy, Coin's agenda, the next mission. When she explains their shared history, it's almost clinical, as if she's reading out a report on District 12 instead of narrating her own relationship. That part matters because the story frames Peeta's arc as progress. Each time he resists a flash of violence, each time he chooses to stay on the squad, it's celebrated as him becoming more Peeta again. Meanwhile, Katniss is moving in the opposite direction. Prim dies. District 12 is a graveyard. Her mother leaves. The rebellion, she thought, might bring hope turns out to be just another version of the Capitol's games. She isn't reconstructing feelings, she's anesthetizing them. So why does that asymmetry sting so much? Because Peeta is actively working to become safe for her again. He's the one asking the hard questions, apologizing when he snaps, warning others to keep him restrained. He is doing the psychological labor the Capitol should have had to do, but never will. Katniss, by contrast, never really does the parallel work of reopening herself. She's too busy trying not to drown in guilt over Prim to even decide what she wants from him. Here's the pattern interrupt. Peeta forgives her first. He forgives the berries, the staged kisses, the half-truths about loving him. He even forgives her for voting for another Hunger Games with Capitol children. But she never explicitly forgives him for the strangling, for turning her body into a battlefield, for the way his love became a weapon in quarter-quell propaganda. By the time they're back in District 12, you get this uneasy truce. They plant a book of memories. They sleep through the nightmares together. It looks peaceful, but is peace the same as forgiveness? Or is it two traumatized victors choosing the only person who understands the rules of a game they can never really stop playing? And if their healing never sinks, what does that do to the choice she makes in the meadow when she finally says yes to a future with him? Mission to the Capitol. Trust on a hair trigger. So when we jump to the Star Squad mission, You'd think this is where all that shared healing finally pays off. Right. They've survived the arena, the hijacking, the nightmares. Surely the capital is the enemy now, not each other. But here's the real question. If your brain has been trained to treat the person you love as both lifeline and landmine, how do you suddenly switch that off in a war zone? At face value, bringing Peeta onto Squad 451 looks absurd. He's unstable, a symbol, and a recent attempted murderer of the Mockingjay. Coin and Plutarch don't see a traumatized victor who needs rest. They see a weapon or a liability, depending on which way the games tilt that day. If he breaks on camera, they get propaganda. If he dies, they get a martyr. That part matters because Katniss understands this calculus instantly. She doesn't argue that he's safe. She argues that he's useful. Bread Boy, who once tossed her salvation in the rain, is now an asset whose death might help the cause. There is a lot to uncover here, because Katniss is making the same kind of cold assessment the Capitol made about them in the arena. She brings him because he's both danger and necessity, and she's willing to carry both. On the ground in the Capitol, that tension never leaves. We're going to cover the moments where the mask slips. Peeta spots pods, calls out patterns, uses that decorating cake skill to read camouflage in the streets. He literally saves the team by noticing details no one else does. And still, every time he stumbles, every time his voice goes sharp, Katniss's body reacts before her brain. She flinches. She reaches for her bow. She inventories exits. This is where we talk about the bread-baking camouflage joke that isn't a joke. The squad laughs that his cake skills are finally paying off in a real war, but underneath, Katniss is clocking something else. The same creativity that once made the arena romantic now makes him more effective at killing. The relationship between Sweet Peeta and Capital Weapon never fully resolves for her. Then you get the scene where he begs to be killed if he turns. He asks for a safety line that is literally his own death, and Katniss agrees, not just as a soldier signing off on a contingency plan, but as the person who sleeps beside him. She promises to end him if the Capitol's programming wins. That promise is brutal, and it quietly confirms she can never fully relax. Even their trust is edged with an execution order. Their banter follows the same pattern. Dark jokes about him killing her, about don't let me hurt anyone, about whether he's still dangerous. On the surface, it reads as coping, war humor. But if you scratch it, those lines are pressure valves for a permanent crack in her sense of safety. The question isn't if Peeta loves her, it's whether his love can ever outweigh the reflexive fear the Capitol carved into her. So if you're always half prepared for the person you love to murder you, can you ever truly say you've forgiven them, no matter how much you understand they were brainwashed? Or is forgiveness, for Katniss, always going to mean learning to live with a loaded weapon and calling it peace? Prim's death and the silent accusation against Peeta. So when Katniss walks into that Capitol street full of children and parachutes, she's not just walking into another battlefield. She's walking into a rigged arena she doesn't know she's in. You remember how it plays out. The first wave of silver parachutes drifts down, a promise of relief in miniature. Then the explosion, screaming, smoke, bodies, and in the middle of that chaos, Prim does exactly what Katniss has spent 3 books doing. She runs toward the danger instead of away from it. Second wave detonates. Katniss watches her sister burn, the the blast throwing her back the same way the mine explosion once took her father. At face value, this is a political war crime, not a personal betrayal. But here's the real question. What does Katniss's mind do with a loss that huge? She can't just sit in pure grief. That's not how she survives. So almost instantly she starts sorting through suspects. Coin, who authorized the attack, the rebel strategists who signed off, and, very specifically, Gale, whose brainstormed double explosion traps suddenly have a horrifying real-world test case. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters not just for Gale's relationship with her, but for how blame operates in Katniss's head. She needs a chain of cause and effect, a reason, someone whose choice she can point to and say, if you hadn't, Prim would still be alive. It's messy, it's unfair, but it's a survival mechanism. If there's a reason, maybe next time she can stop it. So where does Peeta fit into that chain? On the surface, he's nowhere near the bombs. He's in recovery, struggling with hijacked memories, barely trusted enough to join the Star Squad. But this is where we talk about narrative gravity. His rescue from the capital is the turning point that recharges Katniss as the Mockingjay. Suddenly, the rebellion has its star-crossed lubbers back on the board, its symbol restored, its propaganda machine humming. We're going to cover the politics of that more later, but for now notice the pattern. Every time the Capitol or the rebels amplify the Katniss Peeta story, the war escalates. The games turn into the Quarter Quell. The Quell turns into open rebellion. The rebellion turns into those capital streets where Prim dies. You can draw a straight line from a boy throwing bread in the rain, to a kiss in a cave, to a medic's uniform catching fire. Does Katniss ever consciously think Peeta caused Prim's death? No, she's too rational for that. But on some level, she links the entire Mockingjay arc, the cameras, the propose, the star-crossed lovers branding, to the original games that glued her fate to his. If she had never become that symbol, would Prim ever have been in that crowd? Her grief, her anger at the games, her unease with Peeta's hijacked violence, they all end up in the same mental drawer. She can forgive the reasons on paper, but can she forgive the pattern her brain keeps seeing every time she looks at him? And the real twist is, Peeta sees that pattern too. So what happens when the person you need to forgive is also your constant reminder of why forgiveness feels impossible? After the assassination, numbness instead of forgiveness. So when we pick up after Coin's assassination, you'd expect some kind of emotional reckoning between Katniss and Peeta, right? He tried to kill her. She killed a president. The board is wiped clean. But here's the real question. What if Katniss is so emptied out by the end of the war that there's no one left inside to do the work of forgiving? This is where we talk about District 12 as a graveyard, not a homecoming. Katniss is shipped back there, sedated, burned, and broken. In the book, she's essentially catatonic, wandering the ruins, sleeping all day, barely eating, hunting only because the muscle memory of survival kicks in. She plays with the idea of suicide the way she used to play with berries, not as drama, as an exit strategy. And notice what she doesn't do. She doesn't ask for Peeta. She doesn't write to him. She doesn't even frame his absence as a question. The relationship that once fueled capital gossip has been reduced to a gap in the narrative. That part matters because it tells you where her priorities are now. Not romance, not closure, just staying alive one more day in a district that holds every ghost she has. Peter's return to 12 comes later, almost as an afterthought. We're told he shows up, we're told they start taking walks, baking, planting primroses, but we're going to cover what the text very pointedly does not give us. There is no big confrontation about the strangling in 13, no breakdown where he sobs over the hijacking and she absolves him. At face value, it's almost disappointing if you went in expecting a capital R redemption scene. Why skip the catharsis? Why not let the star-crossed lovers finally talk about the games that ruined them? Because Katniss isn't in processing mode. She's in survival mode. Again, the same mode she was in when she took Tesserae, when she volunteered for Prim, when she aimed an arrow at the arena force field. Only now the arena is her own mind. Survival mode is brutal triage. You don't sit down and separate what Peeta did under hijacking from what he chose. You barely separate getting out of bed from not getting out of bed. The Capitol weaponized him, turned his love into terror with tracker-jacker venom. But unpacking that would mean staring directly at every time his hands were on her throat, every time his voice said she was a mutt. Why go there if you can just not? So what grows between them isn't a clean arc of injury, apology, forgiveness. It's quiet coexistence. Two victors in a half-empty village orbiting each other through routine. Bread, hunting, a book of plants, shared nightmares. The past is a minefield, so they step around it. You feel the promise of something gentler, but also the sense that some questions will never be asked out loud. And that raises the next problem. If forgiveness never gets spoken, how do you tell where forgiveness ends and simple dependence begins? Domestic truce, bread, gardens, and unspoken history. So now we're in this strange, quiet aftermath where Katniss and Peeta technically have everything the games ever promised a victor. A house, safety from the reaping, full cupboards. But here's the real question. If the war is over and they've won, why does their home in District 12 feel less like a reward and more like a ceasefire? Day to day, their lives are almost painfully ordinary. Peeta goes back to baking, first in his own kitchen, then for the slowly returning town. You can picture him up before dawn, hands in dough instead of blood, using the same skill that once kept a starving girl alive in the rain behind the bakery. Katniss slips into the woods again, bow in hand, hunting for game and for the version of herself that existed before cameras, before the Capitol turned her into a symbol. They rebuild Victor's village, and by extension, the district around it. The once empty mansions get repaired roofs, swept floors, gardens that actually stay tended. That part matters because the village used to be a stage set for the Capitol's promise. Win the games, live in luxury. Now it's a half-ghost suburb where two traumatized victors are trying to remember how to be human. At face value, it's domestic peace. Underneath, it's damage control. We're going to cover the small gestures that tell you they care, even when they can't say why. Peeta plants primroses for Prim, literally putting her name into the ground so Katniss sees it every time she walks outside. He's not just gardening, he's acknowledging the crater in her life that his hijacked hands helped deepen. Katniss, who once barricaded herself in her own house, starts letting him in, then letting him stay, until sharing a bed becomes less about romance and more about survival triage. They hold on to each other through nightmares because no one else in the district understands what the games did to their minds. But notice what never happens on the page. There's no big scene where Peeta apologizes for choking her in District 13. No unpacking of the hijacking, no late-night autopsy of the cave kisses, or the beach proposal, or the moment his fingers closed around her throat. This is where we talk about omission as a choice. Suzanne Collins shows us bread, gardens, shared blankets, but not the conversations you'd expect if total forgiveness had truly happened. So what are we looking at here? Healing or a truce? They choose each other because every other relationship has been burned away by war, because no one else knows what it means to be both a symbol and a target. There is a lot to uncover here. Is agreeing to live together, share a bed, and eventually raise children the same as fully forgiving the person who once tried to kill you? Or can love, need, and forgiveness run on separate, parallel tracks without ever fully meeting? Hold on to that question, because to answer it, we have to dig into what forgiveness even means for someone who never trusted the world to begin with. So when we hit the epilogue, you're expecting an answer to that forgiveness question, right? Katniss and Peeta in a meadow, kids in the distance. The game's finally over. At face value, it looks like the story cashing in on its promise of hope. But here's the real question: is the tone actually hopeful, or is it haunted? This is where we talk about the dandelion line, because that part matters. Katniss tells us Peeta grows back after everything, like the dandelion in the spring, and that eventually she understands she does love him. That image is gentle, regenerative, almost mythic. Peeta as the first bit of colour after a brutal winter, the same way that bread in the rain once was. It sounds romantic, until you put it next to the rest of what she says. In the same breath of that future, Katniss admits it takes her 15 years to agree to children. 15. And even then, she still has nightmares almost every night. We're going to cover why that number is so important. Most epilogues jump straight to the adorable toddlers and the healed victors. Collins instead gives you a clock, a measure of how long it takes Katniss to even partially lower her guard against the world that stole Prim. So what kind of relationship survives in that space? Katniss frames it very clearly. When she spirals, Peeta's the one who pulls her out of the dark, talking her through the games in her head, listing good things, anchoring her. He needs her too, for her fire, her refusal to give up, the part of her that kept walking into danger when every district told her not to. It's mutual dependence, not uncomplicated romance. Two trauma survivors building a system so they don't drown. Notice the verbs she uses: cope, manage, get through. She never says, "I trust him completely again." She never says, "I forgave him for the hijacking," or "I no longer flinch when I remember his hands around my throat." The Capitol broke his mind and turned him into a weapon, and Katniss intellectually knows the reason. But emotional trust doesn't reboot on command. So why does she stay? Because in a world that still feels hostile, Peeta is the only person who understands every layer of her story. The bread, the arena, the star-crossed performance, the moment he tried to kill her and then begged to die rather than hurt her again. The epilogue reads less like happily ever after and more like we found the only person who can stand to sit with our ghosts. That is powerful. It is love. It is also very clearly survival. And if you listen closely, you can hear the gap. Love, need, routine. but not quite absolution. So what does it mean to build a life with someone you may never fully forgive? And why is Katniss, of all people, willing to live inside that tension? Can Katniss forgive anyone? So here's the uncomfortable turn. If Katniss can live, marry, have children with someone she may never fully forgive, we have to ask a bigger question. Is she actually capable of full forgiveness with anyone? Because this is where we talk about her mother. At face value, the story gives you closure. Katniss eventually understands that her mother's depression after the mine explosion was an illness, not a choice. She intellectually gets the reason her mom went away inside herself, while Katniss kept the family alive. But here's the real question. Does she ever emotionally let it go? The answer is no. That childhood memory of shaking her mother, begging her to wake up while the pantry was empty, never stops burning. Even in District 13, even after Prim translates the psychology for her, Katniss keeps that hard, cold distance. She doesn't scream anymore. She just never really lets her back in. Then you have Gale. If anyone should have a path back, it's the hunting partner who shared bread, snares, and every whispered complaint about the district and the capital. But after Prim's death, and the suggestion that Gale's traps might have been used in the bombing, Katniss doesn't negotiate, doesn't ask for proof, doesn't offer a promise of maybe later. She cuts the relationship off at the root. Permanent estrangement. They don't rebuild a friendship. They don't become distant allies. They become nothing. That part matters because it shows you her pattern. Once trust is fused to pain, she doesn't rehab it. She amputates. And it's not just other people. Katniss never really forgives herself either. The games end, the war ends, but the internal tribunal never adjourns. She cycles through the same charges, surviving when her father didn't, killing other tributes, failing to protect Rue, failing to protect Prim. Even in the meadow with her children, she's still running the mental, real or not real, just to get through the day. The guilt is a constant background radiation, not a storm that passes. Trauma psychology has a reason for this. Full forgiveness usually needs two things: safety and emotional bandwidth. Your nervous system has to believe the danger is over before it can afford generosity. Katniss's never does. Decades of hunger, reaping, the arena, the bombing of District 12, the hijacked Victor who tries to kill her, her body learns that the games never truly stop, so her system stays on guard. Forgiveness becomes a luxury she can't spare resources for. So if she can't fully forgive her mother, can't forgive Gale, can't even forgive herself, what are we really asking when we expect total absolution for Peeta, who is both the boy with the bread and the boy with his hands around her throat? There is a lot to uncover here. Maybe the point isn't that she secretly hates him, but that her character is built for survival, not sainthood. And that sets up the next question. If forgiveness isn't what holds them together, what is? Book versus movie, how adaptation softens the wound. If you've only seen the movies, you probably think the Katniss Peeta story ends on a pretty solid note. Soft lighting, quiet fields, 2 kids, fade out. But here's the real question. What happens to that ending once you put the book version of Katniss back into those same scenes? On the page, you live inside her head, and that part matters because her interior monologue never fully stops questioning him, or the narrative that welded them together. In the first games, during the cave sequence, The book Katniss is constantly calculating, how much do I need to sell this star-crossed lovers act to get sponsors? Does Peeta really feel this? Or is he playing me too? She literally grades her own kisses as strategy. The films keep the cave, but they strip out the running commentary. At face value, you just see chemistry and tenderness. You don't hear the girl thinking, this is an act, and I'm trapped in it. This is where we talk about visuals doing quiet propaganda. In the movie Cave and the Catching Fire beach scene, everything is framed romantically. Close-ups, music swell, soft focus on their faces. The Capitol would be proud. In the books, those same moments are full of discomfort. On the beach, Katniss is torn between duty to Peeta, her bond with Gale, and the knowledge that the games have turned her relationship into a weapon. The movie leans into the promise of a love triangle payoff. The book leans into the horror that there is no version of this where she gets out clean. Then we hit the hijacking. On screen, Peeta's recovery is intense but compressed. He tries to kill her, he's restrained, there are a few therapy scenes, and before long he's back on missions, trading banter and memories. We're going to cover why that compression matters. In the books, his hostility drags on for chapters. Katniss flinches at his presence, tracks every small improvement, and keeps waiting for the next attack. You sit with the question, if the boy who once threw you bread now wants you dead, can you ever unclench around him again? The film's faster fix makes total forgiveness feel attainable. The book makes it feel aspirational. Even the epilogue shifts tone. On the page, Katniss admits she still has nightmares, that it took years to agree to children, that she plays a mental game of listing good things just to survive. Her relationship with Peeta is a choice to endure together, not a fairy tale. The movie trims the darker lines and lets the image do the work. A peaceful meadow, a sleeping baby, a quiet smile. The trauma's still there, but it's background noise, not the main text. So if your image of their relationship comes mostly from the movies, of course you believe in total forgiveness. The adaptation keeps the hope, but sands off the splinters. The books leave you with a harder question. What does love look like when the games never fully end? And in the next section, we need to ask whether Katniss staying with Peeta is about romance at all, or about finding the only person who understands the wreckage. What if Katniss could forgive him? So if their ending feels more like a truce than a fairy tale, here's the real question. Was there ever a version of this story where Katniss could actually forgive Peeta all the way? Not just survive beside him, but stop flinching at the parts of him the games turned into weapons. Start with the biggest variable. What if the Capitol never hijacks him? No tracker jacker venom. No rewired memories. No hands around her throat in District 13. In that world, they still go through two arenas. They still become the star-crossed rebellion symbols, but Peeta never becomes the monster in her nightmares. The Capitol can still parade them, still twist their relationship for propaganda, but it can't make her associate his face with suffocation. That part matters because Katniss's core wound is always that intimacy equals danger. Remove the strangling, and you remove the most visceral proof her brain has that loving someone gets you killed. Then push it further. Imagine after the war, someone in this new government actually believes in mental health more than optics, and Katniss gets real trauma therapy. Not coin flip check-ins, but months of guided work. This is where we talk about her being walked back through the bread in the rain, the cave performance, the beach kiss, and the hijacked attack, not as a blur of guilt and panic, but as separate events with separate authors. A therapist could help her say, the Capitol chose to weaponize Peeta. Peeta did not choose to be the weapon. At face value, that sounds obvious to you, but for Katniss, who's been taking responsibility for every death since the seam, separating Peeta from the Capitol's actions would be revolutionary. There is a lot to uncover here if we rewind even further and slow everything down. What if they'd had years in District 12 before the reaping, not as strangers at the bakery window, but as reluctant allies, trading bread for squirrels, sharing the same fence line, letting the bread incident age into something other than a live debt on her ledger? A slower burn relationship gives her time to move from "I owe you" to "we're in this together." The reason that matters is because Katniss doesn't enter the game seeing Peeta as a partner. She enters seeing him as one more variable she has to control so Prim lives another year. And then there's Prim, the hardest what if. If she doesn't die in that final Capitol blast, does Katniss keep associating Peeta with the chain of events that put her sister on that battlefield? Without that last shattering, maybe the bread memory wins out over the strangling memory. Maybe the boy who gave her hope in the rain finally outweighs the man who almost killed her in a concrete bunker. Put all those changes together, no hijacking, real therapy, a slower start, no Prim's death, and you can see a version of Katniss who actually reaches full forgiveness. Not because Peeta suddenly becomes more worthy, but because the system stops stacking the deck against her capacity to heal. In our canon, the games never really end, so her forgiveness never really finishes either. So when she stays with him anyway, what does that say about the kind of relationship they're actually in, and what she's quietly giving up to be there? Love without forgiveness, is that enough? So when she stays with him anyway, what does that actually mean? If the games never really end for Katniss, then here's the real question. Can you have a real relationship when part of you is still stuck in the arena, tallying every hurt? This is where we talk about the difference between love and forgiveness. You can care about someone so much it physically hurts. You can choose them over and over, be willing to die for them even, and still not fully forgive them, or what happened around them. Forgiveness is about releasing the debt. Love is about deciding the person is worth living with, debt and all. Those don't always arrive on the same train. Katniss is the definition of that split. She chooses Peeta in the end because he's kind, because he understands the games down to their ugliest mechanics, because when her nightmares drag her back to the arena, he can actually reach her. He's the boy with the bread, the one who threw her a lifeline when her district and the Capitol had both failed her. But that part matters because it also fixes him in her mind as a walking ledger entry. Salvation on one side, unbearable guilt on the other. Remember, her whole life is organized around scorekeeping. Tesserae, hunting, who owes who in the hob, which victor is safe and which is a threat. So of course she keeps an internal record of every time Peeta was used against her. The staged confession in the first games, the cave performance she had to sell to survive, the hijacking that turned his love into lethal hatred. At face value, she knows it wasn't his fault. On a gut level, her body remembers his hands on her throat. So what does their relationship become? Less fairy tale, more long-term ceasefire between co-survivors. They function almost as war buddies, sharing a foxhole decades after the war ends. They don't need perfect emotional clarity to operate. They need routine, shared jokes, planting primroses, a child's laugh in a meadow. The promise isn't, "I'll never hurt you again." The promise is, "When the nightmares come, I'll be here." That's a very different kind of hope. And this is where Suzanne Collins quietly refuses the trope that love fixes everything. Peeta's devotion doesn't magically restore Katniss's trust. Her choosing him doesn't erase the Capitol's hijacking program or the games that weaponize their feelings. The reason their ending works is precisely because it doesn't pretend trauma can be transcended by one perfect kiss on a beach. Here's the pattern interrupt. The story gives you a home, kids, and sunlight, and still refuses to call it a cure. Reading their ending as a fragile, imperfect love story without full forgiveness actually honors the darkness of the series. It admits some wounds never close. You just build a life around the scar. The question then becomes, what does it cost Katniss to live in that compromise? And what parts of herself does she have to bury to keep that fragile peace? Why this reading matters. Katniss is a different kind of heroine. So when you realize Katniss is living in that compromise, here's the real question. What does it mean that she never fully lets Peeta off the hook? At face value, we're trained to expect the good love interest to be rewarded with total forgiveness. The girl survives, she heals, she softens, she thanks the boy who stayed. Roll credits. But Katniss refuses to play that part. This is where we talk about the trope she breaks. So many heroines are written as endlessly empathetic, always ready to understand, to absolve, to put their own anger aside for the relationship. Katniss is not that heroine. She's a victor whose core wound is survival, not romance. The games taught her that trust gets you killed, that every promise has a price, that even the boy with the bread can be turned into a weapon against you. Why would she suddenly become emotionally perfect by the epilogue? There is a lot to uncover here, because Collins doesn't just let Katniss be hurt, she lets her be petty, guarded, and occasionally unfair. Katniss keeps score. She remembers the cave performance, the staged confession, the way Haymitch and Peeta made decisions about her image without asking. Later, she remembers the hands around her throat in District 13. Even when she understands the Capitol hijacked him, that part matters because understanding is not the same thing as forgiving. And that's radical, especially for a female protagonist. Katniss is allowed to be angry at the good boy. She's allowed to recoil, to hesitate, to pick Peeta in the end, not because her resentment vanished, but because his steadiness is the best chance she has at a bearable life. Their love becomes a truce, not a cleansing fire. The story doesn't punish her for that, it just sits in the discomfort. Why does that matter beyond this one relationship? Because it lines up perfectly with Collins's larger project. Exposing the long-term costs of war. The Capitol sells the games as a path to glory, as a promise that suffering will make you special. A lot of stories echo that by treating trauma as a shortcut to wisdom or kindness. But Collins keeps saying no. Trauma in Panem doesn't make you gentler, it makes you flinch when someone raises their voice. It makes you sleep with the door barred, even when you trust the person on the other side. Many readers with their own scars see that and go, oh, finally. They recognize a heroine who doesn't magically forgive everyone who hurt her, even accidentally, who can love someone and still resent what they represent. The games, the capital, the bread that saved her and chained her. Taking Katniss seriously on those terms means resisting the urge to sand down her edges into a comforting narrative. Instead, you sit with the fact that this victor never becomes the healing symbol the districts might want, and ask what it means that the story lets her stay that complicated. Recap: the ledger that never balances, so when you pull all of this together, you start to see something uncomfortable. Katniss and Peeta's story isn't a straight line from bread to betrayal to healing. It's a ledger that never quite balances. Go back to the origin point. The bread in the rain. At face value, it's a simple act of kindness, from a baker's son to a starving girl behind the pig pens. But here's the real question. What does that bread cost Katniss? From that moment, Peeta is soldered to her survival guilt. Every time she thinks of staying alive, she has to remember the boy who burned his family's bread and took a beating so she and Prim didn't die. That part matters because in her head, she doesn't just owe the Mellarks, she owes him her entire continued existence. Then the games take that private debt and weaponize it. We're going to cover the confession, the cave, the berries, the quarter quell as one long pattern. Peeta's love gets turned into capital content. The rooftop confession, decided with Haymitch, broadcast to the districts, no consent from Katniss. The cave, she has to perform affection on cue for sponsors, constantly asking herself, is this real or strategy? The berries, their mutual suicide threat becomes a propaganda symbol that saves them but also chains them together as the star-crossed lovers. Victors. By the quarter quell, every kiss, every hand squeeze is another line in her internal spreadsheet. He keeps saving me, I keep surviving, and the games keep profiting. This is where we talk about the hijacking and the strangling, because the capital doesn't just add more numbers to the ledger, it flips the entire equation. Tracker Jacker Venom takes the boy who once threw bread to her and rewrites him into the boy who throws death at her. In District 13, her safest person wraps his hands around her throat. Her body learns a new rule. Peeta equals oxygen cut off. You don't forgive that with a speech. You don't even forgive it with logic, because her nervous system doesn't care that the capital did it. It only remembers that when she let herself get close, she almost died. Post-war, we see the domestic truce. Victor's village, but burned down. Two broken people circling each other. Nightmares, grief, a slow rebuilding. They hunt, they plant, they make a book, they have children, there is dependence, tenderness, routine. But notice what's missing. There is no explicit, cathartic forgiveness scene. No moment where Katniss says, I release you from the debt of the bread, the staged kisses, the hands around my throat. So the core line is this. Katniss loves Peeta, needs him, and chooses him. She builds a future with him, she lets him hold their children. But in a world built like Panem, that doesn't automatically mean she ever truly forgives him. The games trained her to keep score. The capital trained her to expect betrayal in every promise. The real question now is, if forgiveness never comes, what exactly is it that she's choosing instead? And why does that choice still feel, in its own way, hopeful? Your turn. Does Katniss ever forgive him? So now it's your turn to step into the arena with this question. If forgiveness never quite shows up on the page, what are we actually seeing between them? At face value, you get the epilogue, the kids, the quiet mornings in what's left of District 12. But here's the real question. Do you think Katniss ever truly forgives Peeta, or does she just learn how to live with him and with herself? I want you to go back to the text in your head. What's the one scene that for you tips the scale? Is it the moment in District 13 when he chokes her and she later chooses to sit with him in the hospital anyway? Is it the real or not real game, where she keeps answering his questions even when it hurts? Or is it something smaller, quieter, like when they work on the plant book together in Victor's village before everything explodes again? There is a lot to uncover here in how you read those choices. Drop your favorite Katniss Peeta moment in the comments and tell me what you see there. Is it love? Plain and simple? Is it guilt? This sense that she owes the boy with the bread a life he never asked for? Is it necessity? Two Victors clinging to the only person who understands how the games rewired their brains? Or is it some messy combination of all three, where every promise between them carries both hope and resentment at the same time? This is where we talk about alternative readings too. Maybe you see way more forgiveness in that epilogue than I do. When Katniss says her children are the proof that I will not end the same way as other broken Victors, do you read that as her finally letting go of what Peeta did under hijacking? When she admits she needs his steadiness to survive the nightmares, is that dependence, or is that the closest she can come to saying, I forgive you? If you think she does forgive him, make your case. Pull a line. Pull a scene. Tell us why, because the reason this relationship works on the page is that it refuses to be simple. Any Victor will tell you the games don't end when you win, and Katniss and Peeta are proof. So if you enjoyed going this deep into one damaged pair from one ruined district, you're in the right place. We're going to cover Gale and the ethics of choosing war over home, Haymitch, and what decades of mentoring do to a human being, Finnick and Annie, and what it means to build a promise out of shared trauma. So stay with me for those future Victor's Village-style dives. In Panem, nobody walks out of the arena clean. Not the careers, not the rebels, not even the Victors we root for. And maybe the bravest thing Katniss and Peeta ever do isn't forgiving each other perfectly. It's choosing each other anyway with all the things they can't quite forgive, and calling that choice a kind of hope.